I built my father-in-law's empire from scratch, then he gifted it to my wife's real match. The table was set, but not for me. My name is Nathan Wilder, and for over a decade I gave everything I had to Hastings Global, the company I helped build from the ground up. I was a fresh-faced MBA grad when I married Celeste, the only daughter of Gerald Hastings, a name that once echoed through boardrooms and investor calls like a symbol of legacy. What people didn't know, though, was that legacy was on the verge of collapse when I came in. Gerald's company wasn't the empire it is today. It was a legacy in shambles, full of outdated strategies and bleeding contracts. He was proud, stubborn, and drowning in debt, even though he kept wearing those polished cufflinks like nothing was crumbling beneath his feet. At first, I didn't see it as my problem. I was the son-in-law expected to smile at galas and not question the quarterly reports. But I couldn't help myself. Numbers whispered things to me that people didn't, and those spreadsheets told me one thing loud and clear: the ship was sinking. I didn't ask for permission to step in, I just did. I started with operations, then finance, then acquisitions. One by one, I negotiated us out of toxic vendor contracts, streamlined the supply chain, and found international partners that doubled our revenue in 18 months. I didn't take a salary for the first 2 years. I reinvested everything. I skipped vacations, canceled anniversaries, and turned down offers from Silicon Valley just to stay and build this. And build, I did. By the time year 10 rolled around, Hastings Global was worth over $85 million. Everyone celebrated Gerald Hastings as a visionary. I didn't mind. Not at first. Let the old man enjoy the spotlight. It was his name on the door. But as time passed, I started to wonder if anyone remembered the man behind the curtain. The strategist, the builder, the one who kept his head down and made the magic happen. Then came the dinner. The Hastings family doesn't do small affairs. Everything is grand, fresh orchids flown in from Japan, champagne chilled to precision, and waiters who glide across marble floors like shadows. That night, the long dining table stretched like a red carpet into the heart of the estate. Family, friends, executives, everyone was there. Celeste sat beside me, flawless as always in her diamond-studded gown, her hand resting gently on my wrist like a reminder. Don't ruin the aesthetic. Across from us, Gerald sat with a glass of aged bourbon, swirling it slowly, his eyes on me but not really seeing me. "Nathan," he said, tapping the crystal with a knife. "Tonight's special. We're celebrating transitions." I looked up. Something about his voice made the skin on my arms tighten. After months of consideration, he continued, "I've decided to step down from day-to-day leadership, and I'm passing the reins to someone I know will take this company even further." My heart paused, not out of excitement, but because the look Celeste gave me didn't match the words I'd expected next. Gerald raised his glass. "To the future CEO of Hastings Global, Bryce Carter." Silence, then applause, except from me, because I couldn't move. Bryce stood from the far end of the table, a man with a smile made for press releases and a handshake that felt like a sales pitch. Tall, blonde, 32, Harvard MBA, LinkedIn perfect, and recently married. To Celeste, my wife. Correction, my soon-to-be ex-wife. I blinked. For a moment, the only thing I could hear was the sound of blood pounding in my ears. Celeste's hand was gone from my wrist. Instead, she was smiling up at Bryce as he kissed her on the cheek. Surprised, Gerald asked me, still smiling as if he hadn't just detonated the last 10 years of my life. "It's just business, son." I looked around. No one met my gaze. Not her brothers, not her mother, not the executives I'd mentored, guided, promoted. No one. They all knew. And they had all decided I didn't matter anymore. I didn't speak that night. Not a word. I finished my drink. I even forced a smile when Celeste leaned over and whispered, "You'll be okay. You're smart. You'll land on your feet." She said it like she was offering a band-aid to a man who'd just been stabbed. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark study of our mansion, the one I had bought, renovated, designed, watching the lights flicker in the distance. I pulled out every contract I had ever signed, every clause, every hidden thread of legal language I had insisted be inserted. And I smiled, because Gerald Hastings had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the son-in-law. He thought he'd raised a servant, but he'd trained a king. When they planned to bury me, they forgot. I planted the land. At 4:00 a.m., I poured myself a black coffee in a kitchen I no longer felt at home in. The same kitchen where Celeste used to laugh in oversized sweaters and eat cereal out of a champagne flute. That woman was gone. Or maybe she had never been real in the first place. My name is Nathan Wilder, and I was about to teach the Hastings family what happens when the builder they buried remembers he still owns the blueprints. I didn't storm out. Didn't smash things. I moved like a man with a plan. Because I had one. Gerald Hastings had given me access to the very foundation of his empire, not just the public-facing assets, but the shadow ones, the trust structures, the private equity deals, the intellectual property silently filed under shell corporations. And for the last 5 years, I had slowly, carefully consolidated them under a quiet, forgotten holding company. A holding company with one owner. Me. It started back when Gerald tried to push through a questionable expansion deal in Eastern Europe. I vetoed it, and he was furious, told me I was too cautious, not visionary enough. What he didn't know was that I used that moment to begin my quiet exit strategy. Clause by clause, deal by deal, I restructured control under a new vehicle, Falcon Ridge Partners. Registered offshore, legally protected, financially invisible unless you knew where to look. Gerald didn't. Neither did Celeste. Not even Bryce. But I did. That night, while they celebrated their transition of power with vintage champagne and shallow toasts, I reactivated Falcon Ridge's dormant status, logged in, checked every linked entity, every strategic investment, cross-referenced the terms. 62% of Hastings Global's operating assets under Falcon Ridge, which meant they belonged to me. But I wasn't going to walk in with a briefcase and wave a contract. No. I was going to make them feel what it's like to lose something you thought you owned. I waited until Monday. The boardroom at Hastings HQ was a cold, glass-paneled beast that hovered 23 stories above the city, the kind of place where egos inflated with every echo of a leather chair creaking. I walked in wearing the same navy suit I'd worn the day the company hit its first $10 quarter. Nostalgic but sharp. The receptionist blinked when she saw me. Mr. Wilder. We weren't expecting you. I smiled. That's the point. Inside the boardroom, the meeting had already started. Gerald at the head. Celeste beside him looking radiant and rehearsed. Bryce in a custom-tailored suit reading off notes like he was auditioning for a role he didn't understand. Nathan, Gerald said, freezing mid-sentence. This is a private, I know, I said. That's why I brought something only the majority shareholder can bring. Gasps, murmurs, shifting in chairs. I tossed a folder onto the polished wood with the weight of a man who had stopped playing nice. Falcon Ridge Partners, I said. Legal owner of controlling interest in Hastings Global, its subsidiaries, and its licensed IP. Cross-verified and documented. I'd suggest everyone take 5 minutes to read. They didn't move, so I opened it for them. Clause after clause. Signature after signature. The timeline was airtight. The ownership transfer fully legal. The voting rights in my name. The patents. The branding. The offshore licensing royalties. Mine. Impossible, Bryce muttered. Unethical, Gerald added. Brilliant, said Leonard Miles, one of the board's longest-standing members. He'd never liked Gerald's theatrics. I saw the flicker in his eyes, the one that meant he had just shifted allegiance. I didn't break a single law, I said, locking eyes with Gerald. You gave me the tools. You just assumed I'd never learn how to use them. Celeste stood slowly. You think this changes anything? You think this makes you the hero in this story? I don't care about being the hero, I replied. I care about balance, about truth, about making sure no one ever again confuses loyalty with naivety. Bryce scoffed. You're just bitter. I walked around the table and leaned close. I'm not bitter. I'm awake. They tried to speak, to negotiate, to recover, but the board was already absorbing the shift. Their glances said everything. They weren't loyal to bloodlines. They were loyal to whoever kept their salaries paid and the stock price climbing. That man was no longer Gerald or Bryce. It was me. I left the building without fanfare, stepping into sunlight that suddenly didn't feel so heavy. But I wasn't done, because reclaiming power isn't enough. Sometimes you have to rewrite the entire rulebook. Nathan stood alone in the executive lounge, the city lights beyond the glass casting broken reflections against the bourbon in his glass. The boardroom confrontation had ended, but the echoes lingered. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't angry. Not anymore. What he felt was hollow clarity, the kind that comes after a storm passes through and you realize the wreckage wasn't from wind or rain, but from your own refusal to evacuate. He remembered the first dinner with Gerald back when he and Celeste had only been dating. The old man had barely made eye contact, more interested in quizzing Nathan about his college GPA than in knowing the person his daughter loved. Impressive resume, Gerald had said then, but impressive doesn't mean indispensable. That line stuck. Nathan carried it like a warning label, like a scar he kept out of sight. Over the years, Gerald never changed. And Celeste. She adapted. Somewhere along the line, the girl who used to ask Nathan what colors inspired his architecture sketches started talking like a PR agent. "Image is currency," she told him once. "We can't afford sentimentality, babe." He ignored the red flags. Love made excuses, and now those excuses had grown claws. That night, after everyone left the boardroom in stunned silence, Nathan stayed behind. He sat alone at the long mahogany table, staring at the seat where Gerald had fumed and where Celeste had pretended to be confused instead of complicit. He didn't feel victorious. He felt aware. For the first time in years, he saw them clearly without hope fogging the lens. They didn't betray me because I was weak. They betrayed me because they thought I wouldn't fight back. The next morning, Nathan walked into the office before sunrise. The building smelled different now, like it belonged to him. Danielle was already at her desk. She gave him a knowing nod. "Board fallout?" he asked. She handed him a tablet, some grumbling, one resignation, but most are processing. Nathan stepped into the boardroom once more that afternoon, this time not to defend but to define. The board members were seated murmuring. Gerald wasn't there. Neither was Celeste. But Bryce, his so-called replacement, was sitting at the far end trying to look confident. Nathan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I know many of you are waiting to see how this shakes out," he said evenly. "So let me help you. The days of symbolic leadership are over. You won't find a kingmaker in Gerald anymore." He forfeited his seat when he tried to give away an empire that wasn't his. He walked slowly down the side of the table. "If you backed this power play, I don't hold grudges. But I do take notes." A nervous chuckle from someone near the end. Nathan smiled without warmth. "Now, I'm not here to play tyrant. I'm here to build. But if anyone here still thinks I'm going to step aside so Bryce here can... What run a marketing campaign? You're in the wrong room." All eyes turned to Bryce. He shifted in his chair. "This doesn't have to be personal, Nathan." Nathan paused. "It's not. That's what you don't understand. If it were personal, you wouldn't have made it through the front doors this morning." A beat of silence, and then applause. Quiet, hesitant, but unmistakably real. A new tide forming. As the room emptied out, Nathan stayed behind once again. This time not out of grief, but to breathe. He stood by the window watching the city come alive below. The skyline he helped shape, the contracts he closed, the deals he signed while skipping birthdays and holidays. And for the first time, he asked himself the question he'd always avoided. What if this entire journey was never about approval? What if it was about becoming someone I could recognize when everyone else walked away? He pulled out his phone. A new message from Celeste. "We need to talk. Please. Just us." He didn't respond. Not out of bitterness, but because he finally understood something. Healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it just looks like letting go. He set the phone down and whispered to the room, "I don't need a seat at their table anymore. I built my own." And for the first time in years, he believed it. The power they never thought he'd keep. The office smelled like tension. It was the scent of polished mahogany, expensive cologne, and fear hiding behind leather chairs and tailored suits. Nathan Hartley walked down the hallway toward the boardroom with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen and who was about to lose everything, except it wouldn't be him. Danielle followed a step behind, carrying a locked leather folio filled with contracts and evidence meticulously gathered over the past 4 months. She hadn't asked questions when Nathan told her to retrieve every document Gerald Whitmore had ever signed. She simply replied, "Give me 72 hours." She only took 48. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Nathan opened the boardroom door, nodding once at the dozen executives who had been summoned on short notice. The board members were already seated, murmuring, speculating. Some looked curious. A few looked irritated. Gerald sat at the head, his expression unreadable. Celeste sat beside him, every inch the composed wife, legs crossed, jaw-tight fingernails digging into her palm beneath the polished surface. And next to her, Bryce, younger, hungrier, dumber. Nathan didn't sit. He stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Let's not waste time. I've called this emergency session to address a critical breach of company governance and an attempted hostile transition that violates every part of our executive shareholder agreement." One of the newer board members leaned forward. "Nathan, are you referring to the alleged handover from Mr. Whitmore to alleged?" Nathan smiled faintly. "I suppose we'll let the documents speak for themselves." He opened his folder, sliding identical copies to each board member. Gerald didn't flinch, but a vein near his temple pulsed. As you'll see on page 3, Nathan continued. The original equity distribution, dated back to 2012, clearly outlines that all executive decisions involving leadership transfer must receive majority shareholder approval. He tapped the final clause. I hold 58%, meaning no decision involving this company's leadership can be made without my signature. There was a long silence. Bryce shifted in his chair. This seems like a technicality, he said, trying to chuckle. Nathan looked at him, his expression icy. So does trespassing until you're in court. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the room, but no one was laughing. Nathan turned back to the group. Gerald knew this. Celeste knew this. And yet last week they began orchestrating a full-scale internal transition. They moved to assign my position to an outsider, a man with no equity, no history in this company, and no stake in its future. He turned fully toward Gerald now. You tried to push me out of the house I built, Gerald. But here's the part you forgot: I never gave you the keys. Danielle handed Nathan a second folder, this one thinner but heavier in implication. These are records of unauthorized financial transactions over the past 2 years. Dubious consulting contracts. Off-the-books payouts, several of which were funneled through shell firms owned by Bryce Kingsley's older brother. A gasp, a shuffle of chairs. One board member removed her glasses. Is that true? Bryce stammered. That's not what it looks like. That was just an investment opportunity. Nathan finished, raising an eyebrow. Of course. I'm sure the IRS will see it that way too. Silence fell again, but now it was a different kind. Not one of speculation, but of fear. Of shifting alliances. Nathan looked at each board member in turn. I built this company when it was operating out of 2 rented floors in a downtown warehouse. When the biggest clients we had were scared to cut checks for more than 10 grand. I pitched. I signed. I delivered. For 13 years. His voice lowered, but somehow it got louder in the room. And now the people who benefited most from that growth are trying to erase me. He stood straighter. I'm not here to ask for their apology, or your sympathy. I'm here to reestablish what should never have been questioned: my authority and my intention to protect this company from being gutted by vanity and ego. Gerald finally spoke. This is a family business, Nathan, and you are no longer part of this family. Nathan's eyes narrowed. You're right. He stepped closer, leaning both hands on the table. I'm not part of this family. I'm not your puppet. I'm not your damn son. I am the man who turned your fading legacy into an $80 million powerhouse, and I'm the man who can dismantle it overnight. Celeste exhaled sharply, breaking the composure for the first time. Gerald opened his mouth to respond, but Nathan raised a hand. No more speeches, Gerald. Here's what's going to happen. Effective immediately, you are removed from the board. Bryce's contract is nullified. Celeste's voting privileges are suspended pending legal review. And who put you in charge of all that? Bryce scoffed. Nathan turned to him slowly. The law, he said. The equity. The contracts you never read. He pulled out one last page, placed it in front of them. Signed, notarized, and filed. Danielle broke the silence. Filed this morning. 7:43 a.m. No one said a word. Nathan finally walked toward the exit, but stopped at the doorway. For those of you still wondering whether I have what it takes to lead this company through its next chapter, he said, turning back, just remember who walked into this room already owning it and who walked out shocked. They were never invited to begin with. Then he left. He didn't look back. The blueprint they never saw. They thought I would retreat quietly, shamefully, like a man who got lucky once and was now being shown the door. But what they didn't know was that for years I wasn't just building Gerald Whitmore's company. I was building a playbook. My own. Every meeting, every memo, every strategic call that passed through me left a mark. A breadcrumb trail only I could follow back to the true heart of this empire. The one I'd kept beating while the rest of them played at royalty. So while they were sipping champagne over their premature victory, I was reactivating every move I had once shelved, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. That loyalty was gone now, and in its place, precision. By noon the next day, I'd met with 3 of our largest international partners, not in boardrooms, but in private working lunches in the kind of tucked-away places where real power moves in silence. None of them flinched. Not one asked about Gerald or Celeste or Bryce. They only asked one thing. Are you staying? And when I said yes, when I told them the vision leaner, faster, decentralized, they shook my hand with a grip I hadn't felt in years. Respect, not pity. Trust, not obligation. I didn't fire anyone. I didn't need to. But I did realign departments overnight. People who had been buried under layers of Whitmore's nepotism now sat closer to my table than they ever had to his. And they rose to the challenge. Turns out when you stop rewarding compliance and start rewarding competence, the game changes. Productivity soared. Clients started reaching out directly. Old accounts that had been left to rust were now calling to schedule fresh talks. I hadn't made noise. I'd simply reminded the world who had been behind the curtain all along. But outside my walls, the Whitmore name was bleeding. The press had caught wind of Bryce's hasty backroom promises of investments made without authority, of consultants paid with no contract to stand on. And Celeste. She was still sending messages, still calling, each one more desperate than the last. You don't have to freeze me out. It wasn't supposed to go like this. He told me you wouldn't fight back. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because finally I had more important things to build. And as for Gerald, the man who once smirked at that table and announced his plan to replace me like a flawed part, he was silent, publicly and privately. Word was his own circle had started to distance themselves. He hadn't just underestimated me. He'd miscalculated the whole system. Because when you build a kingdom on inheritance, not innovation, it only takes one shift in wind to watch it fall. That night, I stood on the rooftop of our headquarters. The city stretched out before me, glowing with the quiet hum of possibility. This wasn't revenge, it was revelation. They had tried to write me out of the story, but I was the one holding the pen now, and I wasn't done writing. When the dust began to settle, what remained was not silence, but a different kind of noise. The kind that brews in meeting rooms behind partially closed doors, in hallways where glances carry weight, and in Slack messages that end with, "Have you heard?" The company wasn't just watching me, they were testing me, wondering if I was just another name in the game or if I was truly who they'd whispered I might be. All these years, the one who actually made the empire run while Gerald wore the crown, so I showed them, not with grand speeches, but with clarity. Every department head received a confidential memo, not PR fluffed, not jargon-laced, just honest. The company is changing. The noise will pass. You're safe if you bring your best. If you've been overlooked, I'm listening. If you've coasted, it ends here. And they responded. The ones who'd been buried the deepest were the first to rise. Lisa from supply chain, ignored for years despite saving us millions, walked into my office with a 12-month streamlining roadmap already in hand. Julio, the mid-level dev who was never invited to strategy calls, was now leading our next-gen API design. No one handed them power. They earned it. And I made sure everyone saw that. As for the ones who'd been Gerald's favorites, the ones who called him the architect and ran every idea through his ego before execution. Some walked, others stayed, but they had to adjust. Because there was no more playing politics, no more hiding behind legacy. It was deliver or step aside. Then came the investors. I'd expected resistance. Doubts, questions about my readiness, about whether Bryce Young shiny molded wasn't still the better public face. But instead, I got something I didn't anticipate: curiosity. They'd seen the headlines, they'd read the articles, half gossip, half truth. But when I walked into those rooms with the new numbers, real projections, real recovery, real vision, they leaned in. Why now? One of them asked me during a pitch in Manhattan. I looked him in the eye, because sometimes the man behind the curtain stops waiting for the permission to step forward. That line ended up quoted in a business journal 2 days later. It wasn't meant to be profound. It was just honest. The shift was happening fast, but I knew one thing: if I wanted this revival to last, it had to be rooted in more than reaction. It had to be built on culture, on people who believed not just in me, but in what we could build together. So I launched something unexpected, a closed-door forum with every team leader, no suits, no titles. We met every Friday afternoon in a repurposed design space with beanbags and espresso. No filters, just real talk. What's broken? What's working? Who's quietly brilliant and deserves a shot? At first they hesitated, then the floodgates opened. What came out was years of frustration, of half-buried genius, of ideas lost in bureaucracy. And what I gave back wasn't empty promises, it was action. We restructured the product team to include 3 engineers from frontline QA who had never seen the inside of an executive meeting. We gave creatives control back from marketing consultants who'd turned our brand into a glossy shell. We brought back hackathon weekends, doubled the mental health budget, and dismantled Gerald's performance review pyramid in favor of peer-led growth metrics. It wasn't just about building a better company. It was about making people feel like this one was finally theirs. But not everyone was celebrating. I received a call from an old client, one of Gerald's closest ties. He didn't mince words. "We've worked with you for years, Mason, but loyalty's a two-way street. Are you cutting ties with your past now?" I answered him with the truth. "No. I'm cutting ties with the parts that weren't built to last." He was quiet. Then he said, "That might be the smartest thing I've heard all year." And just like that, he doubled his order. It was happening slowly then, all at once. Trust not built on fear, but on fire-tested respect. By the end of that quarter, our churn rate had dropped by 32%. Employee retention was up, and engagement on internal platforms had tripled. But more than that, people were smiling in the elevator again. Not because they were told to, but because for the first time in a long time they weren't surviving. They were seen. And I, Mason Wolfe, the man who had once been introduced at meetings as Whitmore's son-in-law, was finally being addressed by name. I wasn't just reclaiming a company, I was rebuilding its soul. When the old guard strikes back, for every move you make, the old guard watches, waiting for a misstep, a moment of doubt, a crack in the armor. And if they can't find one, they build one for you. It started subtly. A reporter from a second-tier finance blog reached out for comment about my hostile takeover. Then a late-night post on a private VC forum started gaining traction. Was Mason Wolfe ever fit to lead? The comments were predictable, anonymous, sharp, and planted. The tone wasn't professional skepticism, it was personal. Every thread hinted at nepotism, questioned my emotional stability, and casually reminded readers that I wasn't the one with the Whitmore name. I knew exactly where it came from. Gerald Whitmore hadn't disappeared. He had retreated. And in retreat, some men rebuild arsenals. I didn't react. Not publicly. Not yet. I had too much to protect to swing wildly. But I did pick up the phone. "Danielle," I said, "I need a list. Everyone Gerald has worked with in the last 5 years. Vendors, consultants, family accounts. Especially anyone connected to our PR or legal ops." She didn't hesitate. "I'll have it on your desk by morning." She delivered. What I found wasn't surprising. Gerald had been running a shadow line of influence for years. Secret retainers, friendly deals, even a private strategist whose only job was to keep his name spotless in the media. This wasn't just about pride, it was about preserving a legacy built on myth. And now, with me controlling his empire, Gerald was trying to rewrite the narrative before the truth cemented itself, so I gave him a chance to stop. A formal letter sent through legal cease all third-party communication campaigns targeting Wolfe Group operations or Mason Wolfe directly. Failure to do so will result in full legal counteraction, including breach of non-disparagement clauses signed in 2020 and 2022. He responded the next day, not through a lawyer, but with a personal invitation. A lunch meeting. His exact words, "for the good of the family." I almost laughed, but I accepted. Not because I believed in reconciliation, but because I believed in strategy. We met at one of his old haunts, Club Carver, the kind of place where servers remember your drink and your secrets. Gerald was already seated sipping a neat bourbon, the same one he always used to toast new partnerships. Or new betrayals. "Mason," he said, smiling as if we hadn't waged corporate war 2 weeks ago. "Still wearing off-the-rack suits, I see." I didn't flinch. "Still hiding behind tablecloth diplomacy, I see." He chuckled. "You always were quick." "No, I just learned fast." The waiter came. I ordered water. "Let's skip the nostalgia," I said. "You're poisoning the well. I'm here to ask you to stop." Gerald's smile didn't fade. "You know what bothers me most, Mason? You don't understand power. You think it's about ownership, about control, but it's about perception, legacy, story, and yours." I said his cracking. His eyes narrowed just slightly. "A tell." He leaned in. "I can still make your life difficult. I can turn investors. I can turn press. I can even turn your employees if I play it right." I let the silence hang for a beat. Then I placed a small USB drive on the table. "And I can expose every off-the-books transaction you've run through Whitmore Capital since 2016. His fingers twitched, just barely. I continued. "You're right, Gerald. Power is perception. But you forgot something. The moment I stopped caring about your name was the moment people started listening to mine." He didn't pick up the drive. He didn't have to. We both knew I wouldn't need to use it. The threat was enough. Lunch ended quietly. No handshake, no nod of respect. Just two men who used to play on the same team now standing on opposite sides of the scoreboard. And I walked out first. Later that week, the forum posts stopped. The rumors faded. The PR smear attempts fell flat. Investors who had paused returned with larger checks. But the most surprising moment came 3 days later in a staff meeting. One of the junior product leads, barely 30, awkward, brilliant, raised his hand mid-discussion. "Can I just say something?" he asked. "I've worked here 5 years. This is the first time I've felt like we're building something that doesn't just wear someone else's last name." The room went quiet. And then applause. That night I walked through the office alone. Lights dimmed, desks quiet. On one of the walls, a team had pinned up mock-ups for our new branding initiative. The theme, Legacy Reclaimed. And under it, in neat black marker, someone had scribbled, "Built by hands, not by blood." That was the war I'd won. Not just against Gerald, but against the idea that power only lives in names. Building what can't be taken. When you stop fighting to prove you're worthy and start building to make yourself undeniable, everything changes. The week after my confrontation with Gerald, the air inside Wolf Group felt different. Not lighter. Not exactly heavier either. Just real. People weren't whispering in elevators anymore. They were speaking up in meetings. They were looking me in the eye. Not out of fear, but something else. Something close to belief. And that was dangerous in the best way. I called for a full executive offsite. No suits, no assistants, no canned talking points. Just 12 of us, department heads, creative leads, R&D product, and a blank retreat center in Carmel Valley. We sat in a circle. I opened the first session with one question. If we didn't have to answer to anyone's legacy, what would we build? No one spoke at first. Then Leah from marketing said we'd stop trying to look like a legacy brand and actually become one. Kevin from product added. We'd stop asking how Gerald would do it and start asking why we do it at all. And just like that, something cracked open. Over the next 48 hours, we reimagined everything. The company's purpose, its place in the world, what we stood for, what we'd never tolerate again. It wasn't just a rebrand, it was a resurrection. Back in the city, I took the plan straight to Danielle. "Kill the current logo," I said. "I don't want anything that feels like inheritance." She raised an eyebrow. "You're sure I'm not building a shrine?" I replied. "I'm building a statement." We called it Phase 1 Name Our North. It started with stripping everything down to its bones department's roles offerings. We redefined success metrics, fired 3 vendors who only existed because they knew Gerald, cut half our board meetings in favor of smaller weekly innovation councils. No more waiting for permission. Then I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I joined a design sprint, sat right next to the junior UX team, took notes, sketched mock-ups, ate bad vending machine pretzels, and stayed till 1 a.m. And not once did anyone ask, "Why are you here?" Because I wasn't just the CEO now, I was the builder. Again. That Friday, I stood in front of 250 employees in the Wolf Atrium. I didn't read a script. I didn't quote Gerald. I just said this. Some of you have asked if we're still a family company. My answer is yes. But not because of bloodlines, because of commitment, because we show up for each other, because we choose the hard way over the easy lie. This isn't about preserving a legacy. This is about building a future no one else can take. The room went silent, and then they stood. Not clapped, stood. I'll never forget that moment, because it wasn't applause for power. It was recognition of purpose. After that, everything moved fast. Press began to shift, no longer fascinated with the downfall of the Whitmore name, but with the rise of the Wolf identity. Wolf Group's new campaign launched under a single bold tagline, "Nothing inherited, everything earned." It hit hard. We got thousands of organic shares on launch day. Young entrepreneurs started referencing the shift on LinkedIn. Even my fiercest former critics posted think pieces like, "Is Wolf Group the new blueprint for modern leadership?" But none of it compared to what happened next. I got a letter, not an email, a real handwritten letter, from a man I'd met once at a conference years ago. He had exited a company after being forced out by a partner's family just like me. His letter ended with this line, "You reminded me that the people who build silently are the ones worth listening to when they finally speak." That stayed with me. Because I knew now that this whole thing, the betrayal, the war, the rise, wasn't just about business. It was about reclaiming the right to speak in your own voice, to not be a stand-in, to not be the guy who made it all run while someone else took the bow, to be the author of your own story, of your own company, of your own name. Just as the Wolf Group began to find its footing under Mason's leadership, a storm brewed on the horizon. A leaked internal memo taken out of context painted Mason as a ruthless leader intent on erasing the company's legacy. The media seized upon it and headlines questioned the direction of the company. Investors grew wary and whispers of discontent echoed through the halls. Mason knew he had to act swiftly to quell the unrest. He called an emergency town hall meeting addressing the entire company. Standing before his employees, he spoke candidly. I understand the concerns that have arisen. Change is never easy and missteps can happen. But let me assure you, our goal has always been to honor our roots while forging a new path forward. We are not erasing our history. We are building upon it. His words resonated with many, but the damage had been done. Trust had been shaken, and Mason realized that restoring it would require more than just words. Meanwhile, Leah, the head of marketing and once a staunch ally, began to distance herself. Rumors swirled that she was in talks with Gerald Mason's father-in-law about a potential return to the company under new leadership. Feeling betrayed, Mason confronted Leah. Leah, I need to know where your loyalties lie, he said. She hesitated before replying. Mason, I believe in what we started, but the recent turmoil has made me question our direction. Gerald offered stability. Mason nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He knew that to move forward, he needed a team that was fully committed to the vision. In the days that followed, Mason made difficult decisions, restructuring the leadership team and bringing in fresh talent who shared his passion and drive. He also launched a transparent communication initiative, keeping employees informed and involved in the company's evolution. Slowly, confidence began to return. The Wolf Group started to regain its momentum, and Mason learned the importance of resilience and adaptability in leadership. The offer that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon when the envelope arrived. Not an email, not a phone call, an envelope. Hand-delivered. Heavy cream cardstock embossed with the insignia of Blackridge Capital, one of the most powerful private equity firms on the East Coast. Mason turned it over in his hands for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single card and 5 words. We want to buy you out. No pitch, no numbers, just a date and a location for a meeting. He stood by the window of his office overlooking the city skyline, the card still in hand. The Wolf Group had weathered storms, survived betrayals, and found its rhythm again. They were growing finally under his leadership. But this was different. This was a test of vision, legacy, and ego. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he did what he always did when life asked a question too big to answer right away. He called his sister Natalie. You think it's real? He asked, pacing the rooftop of the building where they once shared coffee during their earliest startup days. If Blackridge is knocking, it means they see something big, Natalie said. But the question isn't what they see. It's what you still want to build. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He stayed up reviewing numbers, projections, past wins and losses. The offer represented more than just money. It was a declaration, a final punctuation mark on everything he'd created. It was also a temptation, the chance to step away from the chaos, the politics, the legacy wars. To be free. But what did freedom look like, really? The next day, he met with Blackridge. The meeting was held at a penthouse suite overlooking the Hudson River. Sleek floors, chrome finishes, and a panoramic view that screamed power. Across the table sat 2 managing partners, both wearing identical expressions, neutral, unreadable. We believe Wolf has the potential to expand beyond domestic borders. We'd like to facilitate that with you, or without you. It was said politely. But it wasn't a threat. It was leverage. Mason sipped his espresso. And if I say no, one of the partners smiled just barely. Then we'll wait. For your competitors to say yes. It's not personal, Mr. Ford. It's inevitable. Mason let the silence stretch. Then he leaned forward. You think because I look tired I'm ready to give up. But tired doesn't mean done. The partner raised an eyebrow. So you're saying no, I'm saying... Mason paused. I'm not done writing the story yet. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the room without another word. Back in his office, Mason felt the weight of clarity settle in. He wasn't building just to sell. He was building because it still meant something. Because every brick in that foundation had cost him something, and he wasn't going to trade all of it for comfort. But there was still one loose end, one final confrontation. He had heard whispers that Gerald, his father-in-law, was lobbying to buy back influence in Wolf through minority stakeholders, quietly under the radar. The man couldn't let go, not truly, and neither could Eva. That evening, Mason showed up unannounced at a gala event hosted by a partner firm where he knew Gerald would be. He wore no tie, no mask of diplomacy, just truth. When Gerald saw him, the color drained from his face. But he smiled anyway. Always a smile, even when the knife was in his hand. "I hear Blackridge made an offer," Gerald said smoothly, sipping scotch. "You should consider it. You fought hard enough." Mason didn't blink. "I'm not tired of the fight. I'm just tired of pretending you ever built this." For a second, Gerald's smile cracked. "I built? Wolf," Mason said clearly, voice low but unshakable. "And if you ever try to crawl your way back in, I'll remind you and every board member exactly who made it worth buying in the first place." Gerald opened his mouth, but Mason raised a hand. "You had your empire, and you tried to give it away like a wedding gift, but it wasn't yours to give." He turned and walked away. That night, Mason stood alone on the rooftop of his building. The city stretched out beneath him. The skyline was quiet, but inside him something had awakened again. Not rage, not revenge, vision. He wasn't here to run his father-in-law's empire anymore. He was here to build something bigger. His own. The night after I turned down Blackridge Capital, the city felt louder than usual. Or maybe it was just the silence inside me that had changed. My name's Mason Wolf, and I'd just walked away from a deal that could have made me rich overnight. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt strangely exposed. You don't just say no to an empire without consequences. By morning, the whispers had started. A prominent venture blog labeled me arrogant. Another called my refusal a strategic blunder. One investor withdrew. 2 board members asked for clarification on direction. My inbox was full, but not with congratulations, with doubts, with questions, with people trying to understand why I'd walked away from certainty into a storm of unknowns. I sat in my office long after dark that day, surrounded by the sketches I used to keep hidden. Old product designs, hand-drawn logos from the early days. One rough concept Eva and I had once dreamt up over takeout noodles and cheap wine back when success was a hope, not an expectation. I traced the lines with my finger. They weren't perfect, but they were honest. And that's what I'd lost sight of: honesty. In chasing approval and building the empire that made other people comfortable, I'd forgotten that I wasn't here to be chosen. I was here to create. Somewhere around 2 a.m., Natalie showed up. She didn't knock. She never did. She walked in barefoot in a hoodie 3 sizes too big, holding 2 cups of coffee like she already knew I wouldn't sleep. "I saw the interview," she said quietly, handing me a cup. "They're calling you reckless." I smirked. "They've called me worse." She sat across from me, curled her legs beneath her. "So, do you regret it?" I didn't answer right away. The truth was complicated. "Not yet," I said, finally. But the silence after a no is always louder than the applause after a yes. Natalie nodded. "You said no to a future that wasn't yours. That's not reckless. That's rare." We sat there in silence, the kind that only happens between people who've seen each other fall apart and come back stronger. She looked at me dead in the eye and said, "You always talk about building legacies. Just make sure you're not doing it to prove something to people who don't care about the truth." That landed harder than I expected, because deep down, I knew she was right. The next morning, I called an all-hands meeting, not the usual kind with bullet points and projections. This was different. When the room filled, I didn't stand behind a podium. I stood in the middle, sleeves rolled up, eyes raw from no sleep, but sharper than they'd been in months. "I want to tell you why I said no," I began. "Not because I owe anyone an explanation, but because you deserve to know where we're headed." The room was silent. I didn't turn down Blackridge to be a hero. I turned them down because I'm done pretending this company was built for sale. It wasn't. It was built for something bigger than any buyout. Something that outlives headlines, outlasts egos, and outshines people who build things just to watch the numbers rise. I scanned the room, familiar faces, tired faces, hopeful faces. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to remember why you joined, why we stayed up till 2 a.m. to fix a bug no one outside would notice, why we pitched ideas that got laughed at, why we kept showing up even when the industry forgot our name. A beat. This is not a company to be acquired. This is a vision to be built. And then, someone clapped. One hand, then another. And suddenly it wasn't polite applause, it was thunder, it was belief, real belief. That night I walked home, alone, but lighter. When I got in, I took off my coat, tossed it on the chair, and pulled out my phone. I opened a blank note and wrote, "I didn't say no to money. I said yes to meaning." I saved it, not to post, just to remember. Because sometimes saying no isn't the end of the road. Sometimes it's the beginning of one no one saw coming, not even you. The legacy they can't rewrite. My name is Mason Wolfe, and today I walked back into the room they once tried to erase me from, not as an exile, not as a placeholder, but as the name they could no longer ignore. It was 10:00 a.m. sharp when the elevator opened into the grand ballroom of the Sterling Towers, the site of the annual Vanguard Tech Forum. The kind of event where the money is old, the power is quiet, and every handshake is a calculation. I wasn't on the guest list, but I didn't need to be. I was the headline now. Eva was scheduled to speak at noon. Her photo was plastered across the lobby wall, all confidence and crisp lighting, the kind of branding she and her father had always excelled at. But behind the perfect composition, I knew the cracks were already forming. The fallout from Blackridge had shifted the landscape. Investors pulled out. Board members asked questions. Articles surfaced. But none of that mattered as much as what was coming next. At 10:15 a.m., a ripple moved through the room. Some turned, some whispered. And then I saw her. Eva. She walked in like she still owned the space, high heels, perfect posture, surrounded by the remnants of a team that once belonged to me. But when her eyes met mine across the crowd, something flickered. Doubt. For a second, we just stared. No words. No nods. Just a moment suspended between two people who had once shared a dream and then watched it split down the center like a fault line. She looked away first. That's when I stepped up to the mic. No press announcement, no formal invite. Just a man with something to say and no more fear of who might be listening. Before we begin today's presentations, I said, my voice cutting clean through the quiet, I'd like to address the room and the people who still believe vision is louder than valuation. Heads turned. Murmurs rose. I built something once from the ground up. Not for headlines, not for buyouts, but for people, for purpose, for the kind of legacy that doesn't need a boardroom vote to exist. I scanned the crowd. Somewhere along the way, we got sold a lie that power is something given to you. It's not. Power is built, earned, proven. And if you think I'm here to reclaim something that was taken from me, you're wrong. A pause. I'm here because I never lost it. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it didn't need to be, because I saw it in their eyes, the shift, the recognition, the memory of who I was before they rewrote the story. After the event, I stepped outside into the cold morning air. The sky was still, but my phone wasn't. Messages from journalists, executives, people I hadn't heard from in years, and one from Eva. We need to talk. I didn't answer it, but I didn't delete it either. Instead, I walked to a small cafe down the block, the same cafe where years ago I had scribbled our first brand mock-ups on the back of a napkin while Eva texted her father for approval. Funny how far we'd come. I ordered a coffee, sat by the window, opened my journal. The same one I'd been filling since that night I said no to Blackridge. And on the last page I wrote, "You can steal my name from a door. You can take credit for my ideas. You can even replace me in the photos. But you can't rewrite the soul of something I built with my bare hands." That's what they never understood. Legacy doesn't live in contracts. It lives in people, in choices, in the quiet decisions no one claps for, but that define who you are. At noon, Eva took the stage. She spoke in sound bites, smiled on cue, but I could see it in the corners of her performance, the places where doubt had settled in like dust. She was fighting for a narrative. I was living mine. That night, back at the Wolfe & Company studio, our studio, I walked through the creative floor. The team was still there, still building, still believing. And when I stepped into the main conference room, I saw it on the wall, a quote painted in bold letters, "Built, not bought." I smiled. Natalie passed by, pausing at the doorway. "You see the articles?" I nodded. Some called it a power move. Some said it was personal. She tilted her head. "Was it?" I looked around. At first, yeah, it was. But now it's just truth. She smiled. And then in the quiet hum of creation, I saw it clearly for the first time. They tried to rewrite me out of the story, but I'd built a new one, and this time no one else held the pen.